Naomi Carter had always believed that Blackwood Ridge was her sanctuary. Nestled deep in the Texas countryside, the town was a quiet place where everyone knew each other, where the land stretched endlessly beneath wide blue skies. After years of serving in the Air Force as a K9 officer, Naomi had chosen to settle here, far from the chaos of the world she once knew. Her life now revolved around her 12-year-old daughter, Ava, and the 3 Belgian Malinois she trained, Titan, Echo, and Blitz. The dogs were more than just animals. They were family, protectors, and remnants of a past that never fully left her. But lately, something about Blackwood Ridge felt wrong. It started with the quiet disappearances. A rancher's son, a mechanic, even the local school librarian, people vanishing with no explanation, their homes left intact as if they had simply walked away. The sheriff's office provided few answers, brushing off concerns with vague reassurances. Naomi had seen too much in her life to ignore the signs. The unease tightened around her chest like a coiled wire. Then there were the vehicles. At first, it was just a few unfamiliar SUVs parked near the old train station, their tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. Then she began noticing them near her own land, idling at odd hours, engines rumbling like a warning. One evening, as the Texas sun dipped below the horizon, Naomi stood on her porch, Titan sitting obediently by her side. The dog's ears twitched, sensing what she already knew. Someone was watching. Inside, Ava hummed softly to herself, oblivious to her mother's growing tension. The girl was everything to Naomi. Smart, curious, always asking questions about the world beyond their small town. Naomi had done everything in her power to keep Ava safe, to give her a life free from the shadows of her past. But as she watched a black SUV slow near her fence line before disappearing into the night, she felt a deep certainty settle in her bones. Danger was closer than she thought. A week later, that certainty became undeniable. Naomi was at the barn, running Titan and Echo through their drills, when she noticed footprints by the back fence. Fresh, deep impressions in the dirt, too large to belong to Ava. Someone had been on her property. Not long after, she found a small surveillance camera hidden near her mailbox. It wasn't a casual act of trespassing. It was deliberate. Someone was studying her. She reached out to Ryan Hale, an old friend from her military days, now working as an FBI intelligence analyst. His voice on the phone was calm, but the words he spoke left no room for doubt. "Naomi, I've been looking into this group. They call themselves Red Vultures. They're not your typical gang. They move quietly, take over towns from the inside. You won't even notice until they already own everything." Naomi clenched her jaw. "And what do they want with me?" A pause. Then Ryan exhaled. "Your land, for starters. They've been buying out properties all over the region. Those who won't sell tend to disappear." She didn't need to ask what he meant. She had seen it before, in countries far from home, where powerful groups made the rules and those who resisted simply vanished. But this was Blackwood Ridge. This was her home. That night, Naomi sat at the kitchen table, staring at the map she had spread before her. It was covered in red circles, each marking a location where people had gone missing or land had been sold under suspicious circumstances. Her property was surrounded. Titan lay at her feet, his large head resting against her boots, sensing her unease. Blitz, the youngest of the 3, paced near the door. Ava entered the kitchen, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mom, why are you up?" Naomi forced a smile, quickly folding the map. "Just thinking, baby. Go back to bed." But as she kissed her daughter's forehead and watched her return to her room, a deep foreboding settled over her. The following morning, Naomi took Titan and Echo on a perimeter check, walking the land she had fought so hard to keep. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and summer grass, but beneath it, something sharper lingered. the feeling of being watched. As she reached the northern fence line, Titan suddenly froze, his body stiff, ears locked forward. Echo let out a low growl. Naomi's hand went to the knife on her belt, her breath steadying. Someone had been here. She knelt, brushing her fingers over a cigarette butt still warm from being recently dropped. Her pulse quickened. Whoever they weren't being careful. They wanted her to know. As she turned back toward the house, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Ryan. They made their move. Be ready. Naomi didn't waste a second. She sprinted back to the house, her mind racing through scenarios, her body already in motion. Titan and Echo ran beside her, their instincts as sharp as her own. She needed to find Ava. Now, as she burst through the front door, an unnatural silence greeted her. The kitchen chair was tipped over, Ava's cereal bowl shattered on the tile floor. Blitz was nowhere in sight. Then she saw it. The small note pinned to the fridge with a knife. The words, scrawled in bold, unmistakable letters, sent ice through her veins. You have 24 hours. Choose wisely. Naomi's breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale. The fear, the uncertainty, the hesitation, all of it vanished. In its place, a singular burning clarity took hold. Whoever had taken her daughter had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Naomi's hands clenched into fists as she forced herself to take slow, measured breaths. Every part of her body screamed to react, to grab her weapons, storm into town, demand answers. But she knew better. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes were something she couldn't afford. Her mind shifted into a calculated state of focus, the kind she hadn't felt since her days in active duty. Ava was out there somewhere, and Naomi would burn Blackwood Ridge to the ground before she let anything happen to her. She moved swiftly through the house, gathering supplies with the precision of someone who had done this before. A duffel bag was yanked from the closet, packed with extra ammunition, a tactical knife, 2 sidearms, and a small but deadly rifle. In the corner of the room, Titan and Echo sat, watching her movements with quiet intensity, their instincts sensing the shift in energy. Blitz was still missing, and that alone sent another ripple of unease through Naomi's stomach. That dog would never leave Ava's side unless something forced him to. She pulled out her phone, fingers moving fast as she sent a single message to Ryan Hale. They took her. I need intel now. The reply came almost instantly. Tracking now. Stay put. But staying put wasn't an option. Naomi wasn't the kind of person to wait for answers. She went out and took them. Sliding a sleek earpiece into place, she tapped into a private frequency she and Ryan had set up years ago. Tell me what you've got. The line crackled before his voice came through, calm but carrying an edge of urgency. They moved fast. Whoever took Ava knew exactly what they were doing. No obvious disturbances in town, no unusual activity near known cartel operations, but I tapped into the traffic cameras near your property. A black SUV was seen leaving your area around the estimated time of abduction. It turned onto Route 6, then disappeared near an old freight yard outside of town. Naomi's jaw tightened. The freight yard had been abandoned for years, a relic from a time when Blackwood Ridge had been more than just another forgotten town. It was the perfect place to hide something, or someone. She whistled sharply, and Titan and Echo bolted to attention. We're going hunting, she murmured before heading for the truck. The ride was silent, save for the low hum of the tires against the road and the distant howl of the wind through the desert. Naomi kept her eyes sharp, scanning the horizon as she approached the freight yard. Ryan's voice filtered through her earpiece again. This doesn't make sense. If Red Vultures wanted leverage, they wouldn't take Ava just yet. They'd pressure you first, make demands. But they grabbed her first. That means they either know you won't negotiate or... His words trailed off, and Naomi's stomach sank. Or they don't need me to. The thought was chilling. If Ava wasn't just a bargaining chip, then she was something worse, an asset, a liability, or a target. Naomi killed the truck's engine a half-mile from the yard, stepping out into the darkness. Titan and Echo stayed close, their bodies tense, ears pricked forward. She moved low, slipping through the scattered debris of rusted train cars and crumbling storage sheds, her breath controlled, her pulse steady. Every step was calculated, every shadow analyzed. Then she saw it. A faint flicker of movement near one of the larger warehouses. A man pacing near the entrance, his posture relaxed, unaware that death was already watching him. She moved closer, pressing herself against the metal siding of an old container. The man was speaking into a radio, his voice low but carrying in the stillness of the night. "Yeah, we got her. The boss wants us to hold tight. No one moves until he says so." Naomi's fingers curled around the grip of her silenced pistol, but she didn't fire. Not yet. Information was worth more than bodies right now. She waited, heart pounding in controlled patience. Then another voice crackled through his radio. "Change of plans. The package is being moved. 10 minutes. The man cursed under his breath, pacing faster now. Naomi barely had time to process before the warehouse doors creaked open and two more figures emerged, one holding a rifle, the other gripping a leash. At the end of it, struggling against the restraint, was Blitz. Rage flared hot and violent through Naomi's chest, but she swallowed it down, forcing herself to focus. If they had Blitz, that meant Ava had been here. Maybe she still was. But 10 minutes was all she had. She exhaled slowly, then moved. The first man never saw her coming. One fluid motion, a sharp strike to the throat, a quick twist of the wrist, and his body crumpled before he could make a sound. Naomi caught his radio before it hit the ground, pressing herself into the shadows as the other two turned at the faint noise. "What was that?" one muttered. Titan moved first. He was a blur of muscle and discipline, his body colliding with the rifleman before the man could react. A single, strangled cry cut through the air before falling silent. The third man barely had time to react before Naomi's knife found its mark. Clean. Efficient. He slumped against the side of the building, and then all was quiet again. Blitz whined, straining against his leash, and Naomi was at his side in an instant, cutting him free. "Where's Ava?" she whispered, gripping his face. The dog whined again, licking her hand before darting toward the warehouse doors. Naomi followed without hesitation. Inside, the warehouse was cold, the air thick with the metallic scent of old machinery. The faint hum of a generator filled the space, casting a dim, flickering glow over rows of crates. And then, movement. Avenue Naomi's breath caught as she spotted her daughter, bound to a chair but very much alive, her eyes wide as they met Naomi's. Relief flooded her system, but she didn't let it slow her down. Moving quickly, she reached her, slicing through the restraints. "I knew you'd come," Ava whispered, voice shaking but steady. Naomi cupped her daughter's face for just a second, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead before pulling her to her feet. "Always," she whispered back. But they weren't out of this yet. A new sound cut through the air, tires on gravel. More were coming. Naomi grabbed Ava's hand, glancing down at Blitz, Titan, and Echo. Time to go. They moved fast, slipping through the back of the warehouse just as headlights cut through the darkness. Naomi kept Ava close, every instinct on high alert. But as they reached the edge of the yard, she caught something out of the corner of her eye, a logo, barely visible on the side of one of the vehicles pulling in. She froze. It wasn't just the red vultures. This was bigger, and whoever they weren't just after her land. They were after her. Ava Carter knew fear. She had felt it before, The quickened heartbeat when she was caught outside in a storm, the nervous excitement of stepping onto a new school campus, the flicker of unease when she overheard hushed conversations between adults. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that sank into her bones, that whispered in the back of her mind that no one was coming, that she was truly alone. But she also knew something else. Her mother. Naomi Carter wasn't just any mother. She was a force, a warrior, someone who didn't bend, didn't break, and never let anything stand between her and the people she loved. So as Ava sat in the dimly lit room, her wrists still raw from the ropes they had tied her with, she forced herself to remember one thing. Her mother was coming. The space around her smelled of rust and gasoline, a mix of old machinery and neglect. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, but now it was alive with quiet movement. The men outside her makeshift cell weren't the usual kind of criminals she had seen in movies. They were disciplined, organized, moving with precision rather than chaos. That meant something. It meant this wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a mission. But why? She was just a kid, just another girl from a small town. Unless they had taken her not because of her, but because of her mother. She shifted in her seat, testing the bonds again. The ropes were tight, but they weren't impossible. Naomi had taught her better than that. "You never panic, Ava," her mother had told her once. "You assess, you plan, and when the time comes, you move." Taking a deep breath, she let her mind do what it did best, observe. The man who had tied her up had done it fast, rushed. That meant mistakes. She twisted her wrists slowly, feeling for any slack. Just a little more. Outside the door, voices murmured, one louder than the rest. She recognized it, not by name, but by tone. Someone in charge, someone who thought they had already won. She listened carefully, piecing together fragments of the conversation. "She's in position," one man said. "Boss wants her held until we get confirmation." Confirmation of what? Ava's pulse quickened. This wasn't about ransom. They were waiting on something. An order. A signal. That meant she wasn't just a pawn. She was leverage. A creak echoed through the room as the door opened, and a man stepped inside. Tall, dressed in tactical gear, with cold, assessing eyes. Not a thug. A soldier. He crouched down in front of her, his expression unreadable. "You're a smart girl, aren't you?" His voice was casual, almost amused, but there was an edge underneath. "You know why you're here?" Ava met his gaze, forcing herself not to shrink away. "No," she lied. The man smirked, as if he could see right through her. "You're here because your mother is a problem," he said. "And we don't like problems." Ava swallowed hard but didn't speak. Anything she said now could be used against her, and she wasn't about to give them more than they already had. The man leaned in slightly. "Here's the deal, kid. Your mom's tough. She's smart. But even she knows when she's outmatched. The people I work for? They're not some two-bit gang looking for a payout. They're playing a bigger game, and your mother is standing in their way. That's why we need to make sure she knows there's only one way this ends. She walks away, and you get to go home. She doesn't?" He tilted his head. "Well, that's up to her." Ava's hands curled into fists behind her back. They thought Naomi would back down. That was their mistake. But Ava also knew her mother. Naomi would do anything to get her back, even if it meant walking straight into whatever trap they had set. And that was the real danger, because Naomi wasn't invincible. The man stood up, watching her carefully. "Think about that, kid. You're the reason she's still alive. But that only lasts as long as she cooperates." Then he turned and left, shutting the door behind him. Ava let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Fear wouldn't help her now. She had to think, had to act. The ropes were loosening, little by little. Her fingers ached, but she ignored the pain. She twisted her wrists again, pulling, straining, until finally she felt it. The rope slipped just enough for her to move. She worked quickly, careful not to make a sound. Her heart pounded as she pulled her hands free, then moved to untie her ankles. Every second mattered. She could hear footsteps approaching again, heavier this time. The door would open in seconds. She wasn't ready. But maybe she didn't have to be. Her eyes darted around the room, searching, scanning. Then she saw it. A metal rod, barely peeking out from beneath one of the crates. It wasn't much, but it was something. She lunged for it just as the door swung open. The man from before barely had time to react before Ava was on her feet, swinging with everything she had. The rod connected with a sickening crack, and the man staggered back, cursing. She didn't wait to see if he'd recover. She bolted. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, but she could hear shouting now, movement. They knew she was loose. Panic threatened to claw its way into her chest, but she pushed it down. She had a plan. She had to get outside. She ran, her bare feet barely making a sound against the concrete floor. She turned a corner and nearly collided with another guard. He grabbed for her, but she was faster, ducking low and slipping past him before he could get a hold. She sprinted toward the far end of the hall, where she could see a flicker of moonlight streaming through a broken window. Almost there. A sharp whistle rang out in the night, and for a second, Ava thought her mind was playing tricks on her. But then, footsteps. Fast, heavy, the unmistakable sound of paws hitting the ground. Blitz. Relief flooded through her as the dog appeared, darting down the hall toward her, a blur of muscle and motion. "Blitz!" she gasped, dropping to her knees as he skidded to a stop beside her. The dog pressed against her, eyes wild but focused. He had found her, which meant she heard it before she saw it. A single, precise shot cutting through the night. Not a bullet, but a signal. Her mother was here. The chaos outside was growing now. Voices shouting, the sharp sound of gunfire, but not the kind of reckless shooting she had seen in movies. This was controlled, precise, tactical. Ava knew what it meant. Naomi Carter had come for her, and nothing in this world was going to stop her. Naomi Carter moved like a ghost through the shadows, her breath steady, her hands firm around the rifle. The night was alive with distant echoes, shouting, hurried footsteps, the sound of men scrambling to reposition. They knew she was here. They just didn't know where. That was their first mistake. The second, thinking they could take her daughter and get away with it. From her vantage point, behind an old stack of wooden crates, she could see the entrance to the warehouse Ava had been held in. 2 guards stood by the doors, rifles slung over their shoulders, their stances tense but uncertain. They weren't trained military. That was obvious from the way they held their weapons, loose grips, weight shifted too far forward. It told Naomi everything she needed to know. They were just hired muscle, not prepared for someone like her. She exhaled slowly and tapped the earpiece. "Ryan, give me a sit rep." His voice crackled in her ear, low and controlled. "You've got about a dozen men inside the main warehouse, but the real problem is the transport arriving in 5 minutes. Black SUVs, tinted windows, higher-ups. They're here to move Ava." Naomi's grip tightened. "Not happening." She could hear Ryan typing in the background, probably pulling satellite images or running scans. "Naomi, listen to me. This isn't just red vultures anymore. The logo you spotted on that vehicle, that belongs to something bigger, something organized." "Then I'll dismantle it piece by piece," she murmured, shifting her position. She gave a short whistle, barely above a whisper. Titan and Echo responded immediately, their eyes locked onto her, awaiting the signal. The 2 guards by the door never saw them coming. Titan struck first, launching forward in a blur of fur and muscle, clamping down on the nearest man's arm before he could even react. His scream was muffled as Naomi surged forward, one swift strike knocking him unconscious before he could alert the others. Echo followed seamlessly, weaving between the crates to take down the second guard. It was over in seconds. No noise. No time for them to call for backup. Naomi dragged the bodies out of sight and pressed herself against the cold metal of the warehouse door. She could hear movement inside, boots scuffing against the floor, the distant hum of machinery, voices muttering orders. She closed her eyes for half a second, focusing on what mattered. Ava was in there. She had to be. Another sharp whistle, lower this time. Blitz responded, emerging from the darkness with an urgency Naomi had rarely seen. His coat was streaked with dust, his breath heavy. He had been running hard, which meant only one thing. Ava was on the move. Blitz didn't stop beside Naomi. He ran past her toward the back of the warehouse. Naomi didn't hesitate. She moved fast, slipping through the side entrance, rifle raised, scanning. The interior was bigger than she expected. Metal scaffolding stretched high above, dimly lit by flickering overhead bulbs. Rows of crates lined the walls, some marked with insignias she recognized, others she didn't. Her gut told her these weren't just ordinary supplies. She advanced carefully, listening. Up ahead, she caught the faint sound of a struggle, a chair scraping, a muffled cry. Avenue Naomi's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay in control. She crept closer, pressing her back against a steel beam, peering around the corner. 3 men. One was pacing, irritated, checking his watch. The other 2 were standing near Ava, who was still bound but very much aware. Her eyes darted around, taking in details, searching for an opening. Naomi felt a surge of pride. She had trained her daughter well. The pacing man stopped suddenly, pulling out his phone. Naomi's earpiece crackled before she heard Ryan's voice. "I just intercepted a message. They're getting impatient. If their boss doesn't call in 5 minutes, they're moving her. Not on my watch." Naomi moved swiftly, every step silent, controlled. The first man barely had time to register her presence before her blade met his throat. Quick, clean, before he could make a sound. The second man turned, eyes widening in surprise, reaching for his weapon. He never got the chance. Naomi's elbow connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. She caught his wrist before he could recover, twisting it until his grip loosened. The gun hit the floor with a dull thud. The third man reacted faster than the others, swinging his rifle toward her. Naomi ducked just as the shot fired, the bullet slamming into the metal beam behind her. The noise shattered the silence. No more time for stealth. Titan and Echo lunged before the man could get a second shot off, taking him down in a blur of snarling teeth and sheer force. Naomi didn't stop to watch. She was already at Ava's side, slicing through the ropes. "Mom," Ava whispered, breathless. Naomi pulled her close for half a second, pressing a quick kiss to the top of her head. "I've got you, baby, let's go." Ava nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "They have backup coming." "I know," Naomi said, "but so do I." Outside, engines roared as multiple vehicles approached. The air was suddenly thick with tension, headlights cutting through the dark like piercing blades. Ryan's voice came through the comms again. "Naomi, you need to move. Now." She grabbed Ava's hand, motioning to Blitz, Titan, and Echo. "Stay close." They slipped through the side exit just as the SUVs skidded to a stop, doors flying open. Naomi pushed Ava behind the cover of a stacked crate, her mind already assessing escape routes. The men exiting the vehicles were different, sharper, better equipped, moving with coordinated precision. Not just mercenaries, professionals. Then she saw him. A figure stepped out of the lead SUV, tall, composed, exuding authority. The way the others responded to him told Naomi everything she needed to know. This was the real enemy. He adjusted his jacket, glancing around the warehouse yard like he owned it. Then, his gaze settled exactly where she was hiding. And he smiled. Naomi's stomach turned ice cold. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Naomi's grip on her rifle tightened as she watched the man step out of the SUV, his polished boots crunching against the gravel. He moved with the kind of effortless confidence that only came from knowing he was in control. His sharp, tailored suit was an unsettling contrast to the chaos surrounding them. His presence radiating authority that even the armed men around him seemed to respect. Whoever he wasn't just another piece of this puzzle. He was the one holding all the strings. And now his attention was locked on her. A slow, calculated smile stretched across his face, a smile that sent a cold, creeping unease down Naomi's spine. He wasn't surprised to see her. He had expected this. That meant he knew who she was. He knew what she was capable of, and worst of all, he wasn't afraid. "Naomi Carter," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. Words were meaningless at this point. The only thing that mattered was Ava, crouched low behind her, gripping Blitz's collar tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. Naomi could feel her daughter's fear, the way she pressed closer to the dog for comfort. And though she wanted nothing more than to reassure her, she knew the best thing she could do now was focus. The man took a slow step forward, spreading his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "You've made quite the mess tonight. Impressive work, really. But you know how this ends." Naomi's eyes flicked to the surrounding mercenaries, their weapons lowered but ready, their gazes sharp, waiting for the order. She counted at least 15, maybe more hiding in the shadows. Outnumbered, outgunned, but not outmatched. Because they had one fatal flaw. They underestimated her. She let the silence stretch, making them wait, making them second-guess their own confidence. Then, in a voice colder than the night air, she finally spoke. "I don't think you understand what kind of night you're about to have." The man chuckled, tilting his head slightly. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You're a mother protecting her child. It's admirable. Predictable, even. But here's the problem, Naomi. You're alone. There's no extraction team coming for you, no cavalry. It's just you, a few dogs, and a girl who shouldn't even be here." His gaze flickered to Ava for the briefest moment before returning to Naomi. "So let's not pretend you have a choice here. You're out of time." Naomi's pulse remained steady, her breathing even. She had spent years reading people, analyzing threats, understanding exactly when a person was bluffing and when they weren't. And she could see it now, beneath the carefully crafted arrogance, beneath the rehearsed lines meant to intimidate her. He was nervous. Not because he feared her, but because he wasn't sure if she had another move to play. Which, of course, she did. Ryan's voice crackled in her earpiece, barely above a whisper. "Naomi, I've got eyes on you. The second you give the signal, we move." Her jaw tightened slightly. She hadn't been alone. Not entirely. Ryan had been tracking her since the moment she disappeared from the town's radar. And now, he wasn't the only one. Ava shifted slightly behind her, just enough that Naomi could feel the faintest pressure against her back. A silent message. She was ready. Naomi exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then, without breaking eye contact with the man in front of her, she simply said, "Titan." The massive Belgian Malinois launched forward like a bullet, his powerful legs closing the distance before the nearest mercenary could even react. The man barely had time to lift his rifle before Titan was on him, teeth sinking into his forearm, dragging him down with a force that shattered balance and structure alike. The silence of the standoff was shattered in an instant. Naomi moved with deadly precision, her rifle snapping up, her finger pulling the trigger before the first mercenary could even raise his weapon. A single, clean shot, center mass. He dropped. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted around them, the sharp cracks splitting the night as Naomi grabbed Ava and ran. Echo darted ahead, leading them toward the industrial structures lining the back of the lot. They needed cover, needed time. Naomi fired another shot over her shoulder, hitting a second man in the leg, sending him sprawling. Ryan's voice was suddenly in her ear again, sharper this time. "Southwest corner, fence line! I have a vehicle waiting! You need to move now!" But Naomi already knew that wasn't an option. The mercenaries were recovering fast, repositioning. She could hear them shouting, barking orders, shifting their formation. If she ran now, they would cut her down before she made it halfway to the fence. Number. She needed to buy time. Ava clung to Blitz as they pressed against a stack of metal crates, her breathing ragged but her eyes bright, focused. "Mom," she whispered, barely audible over the chaos. Naomi turned, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Ava's ear in a rare, fleeting moment of tenderness. "You listening to me, baby?" she murmured. Ava nodded quickly. "I need you to trust me. Do exactly what I say when I say it. No hesitation. Understood?" Another nod, this one firmer. Naomi kissed her forehead once, quick and fierce. "Good girl." Then she turned back toward the fight. A grenade launcher fired somewhere behind them, a concussive thump sending a shockwave through the ground as a nearby structure erupted in flames. It was meant to disorient, to box her in. Amateurs. She spotted movement to her left, two mercenaries flanking toward their position. Before they could get closer, she fired twice, hitting the first square in the shoulder. The second hesitated just long enough for Blitz to take him down, the dog's powerful body slamming into his chest, sending him hard into the ground. But the man in the suit, the one who had started all of this, he hadn't moved. He was watching, studying, calculating. And then he did something Naomi hadn't expected. He smiled, not in arrogance this time, but in something else. Satisfaction. A cold weight settled in Naomi's chest as realization clicked into place. This wasn't a mission failure for him. This was the plan. Before she could react, her earpiece crackled again, this time not with Ryan's voice, but a new voice, one that sent ice straight through her veins. "Naomi," the voice said smoothly, darkly amused. "It's been a long time." Her blood ran cold. She knew that voice, knew it better than she wanted to. The man in the suit wasn't the one pulling the strings. This was so much bigger than just the Red Vultures, and whoever was really behind this. They had been waiting for her all along. Naomi Carter had always known that some battles weren't meant to be fought on open ground. The most dangerous wars were the ones waged in the shadows, where the true threats didn't wear uniforms or carry flags, but instead hid behind power, wealth, and influence. And now, as she stood in the aftermath of the battle at the warehouse, she understood more than ever that this fight had only just begun. The acrid scent of burning metal still clung to the air, the distant echo of gunfire fading into the night. The once silent industrial yard was now a graveyard of broken men and shattered illusions. The mercenaries had scattered, their bodies left in twisted angles where Titan, Echo, and Blitz had struck with relentless precision. But the real enemy, the one who had orchestrated everything, had disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind nothing but questions. Naomi knew the game wasn't over. It had only shifted. Ava clung to Blitz's collar, exhaustion evident in her young eyes. But there was something else there, too. Something Naomi had prayed she would never have to see in her daughter. Understanding. Ava had always been sharp, always known her mother was different from the other parents in Blackwood Ridge. But tonight had changed something. Innocence had been replaced by knowledge, the kind that couldn't be undone. She had seen the world for what it really was, and she had survived it. Ryan's voice came through Naomi's earpiece, no longer sharp with urgency, but heavy with something else. Relief. "You're clear. No more incoming. I'm pulling back surveillance, but you need to get out of there now. Whoever was really behind this..." He hesitated, something rare for him. "They'll regroup. They weren't expecting you to hit this hard, but they'll come back smarter next time." Naomi already knew that. She had seen it in the way the man in the suit had watched her, the way he had smiled, satisfied even in defeat. He had wanted to see her in action, wanted to understand exactly what kind of threat she was. That alone was more unsettling than anything else, because men like him didn't care about failure. They learned from it, adapted, became stronger. She turned to Ava, brushing a strand of hair from her face, her fingers lingering just long enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "We have to go," she said softly. Ava nodded without argument. No questions, no hesitation. Another thing that had changed. Naomi led her toward the waiting vehicle, Blitz never straying more than a step away. Titan and Echo followed, their trained discipline unshaken even after the battle. They had been built for this, conditioned for it. Naomi had been too, but Ava, she had been meant for something better, something more. The drive back to Blackwood Ridge was silent. Ava leaned against the window, eyes half-lidded, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. Naomi knew she wouldn't sleep, not yet. The adrenaline was still there, still keeping her mind sharp, turning over every moment of the past few hours. Naomi understood that feeling all too well. It was the same thing that had kept her awake long after her first mission, her first close call, her first kill. The weight of knowing you had survived when others hadn't. She reached over, placing a steadying hand on Ava's knee. "You did good tonight." Ava didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I wasn't afraid." Naomi's chest tightened. Not because she doubted her daughter, but because she knew the truth behind those words. Ava had been afraid. She had just pushed through it. And that was far more dangerous than fear itself. When they finally reached the ranch, the sky had begun to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The house stood untouched, an illusion of normalcy against the reality of the night they had just endured. Naomi parked the truck, cutting the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. Ava was the first to move. She climbed out, Blitz sticking to her side as she walked toward the porch. She paused at the steps, looking back at her mother with a question Naomi wasn't sure she could answer. "What happens now?" Ava asked. Naomi exhaled slowly, glancing at the horizon, at the world that had changed while no one else was watching. The red vultures were finished, but the real war, the one against the people who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning, was still ahead, and she couldn't turn away from it. Not anymore. "They'll come back," she admitted. "Not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they will." Ava studied her, then squared her shoulders in a way that reminded Naomi too much of herself. "Then we'll be ready." A strange mix of pride and sorrow settled in Naomi's chest. She had spent so much of her life fighting to protect Ava from this world, but now she realized something else. Ava wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had been forged by this, tempered by it, and she wasn't going to let fear dictate her life. Naomi walked up the steps, pausing beside her daughter. "No matter what happens next, I want you to remember something," she said, voice steady. "You are not defined by the people who come after you. You are defined by what you choose to do with what's in front of you." Ava nodded, understanding without words. Inside, Naomi made her way to the small office at the back of the house. The room was sparse, functional, one of the few remnants of her old life she had allowed herself to keep. She pulled open a drawer, retrieving a worn leather folder filled with documents, maps, names. Ryan's voice came through her phone before she even had a chance to call him. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" Naomi smirked slightly. "Would you?" He sighed. "Number which is why I pulled more files. The logo you saw at the warehouse? It's connected to something bigger than red vultures. We're talking about an operation that stretches across multiple states, with ties to people in places we don't have jurisdiction over." Naomi traced a finger over the map spread out in front of her. "Then we don't wait for them to come to us." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about going after them?" Naomi's gaze darkened. I'm talking about making sure they never get the chance to do this again. There was a long silence before Ryan spoke again. You know this isn't just about you anymore. Ava's in this now, whether you want her to be or not. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, then looked toward the hallway where her daughter slept. Blitz curled up beside her. She had fought for years to give Ava a normal life, but normal was no longer an option. I know, she said finally. Ryan exhaled. All right, then let's do this right. Naomi leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. There was no running from this, no pretending it would go away on its own. The fight had come to her doorstep, and this time she was going to finish it. As the first light of morning washed over the land, she allowed herself one last moment of stillness. Then, she picked up her pen and began writing down the names of every person she was going to hunt. Some battles were fought in daylight, others in the dark. But Naomi Carter? She fought in the space between, and she never lost. At its core, The Silent Reckoning is not just a story about action, strategy, or survival. It is a story about resilience, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. Naomi Carter's journey is a testament to the power of unwavering determination in the face of overwhelming darkness. She is not just fighting enemies in the shadows. She is fighting for something far greater, the right to live without fear, the right to protect those she loves, and the right to stand against injustice, no matter the cost. The story also speaks to the reality that evil does not always come with obvious warning signs. It moves in silence, hides behind power, and thrives on fear. But Naomi proves that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to be controlled by it. Ava's transformation mirrors this theme, showing that even in the most terrifying moments, strength is found not in violence, but in the choice to fight for what is right. Ultimately, The Silent Reckoning is a reminder that justice is not something given. It is something fought for. And sometimes it takes those willing to stand alone in the dark to bring the truth into the light. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.